Oh, good afternoon, everybody. Let me roll this up. We got some neighbors here who have just. There we go. That'll make it a little better for us. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. Man, what a beautiful day here in Astoria. Very calm. Just a slight breeze. The river is very chill. It's just awesome. It's like one of the greatest days here is like when you have a day just like this where it's very chill, very mellow, and you only get maybe, what, 2, 3 months of this out of the entire year. So, like, 9 months out of the year, it's miserable, it's raining, it's just like, it's gray, it's dreary. But then the handful of days that it's like this, it's exceptional. Like, this is so worth it. It makes it so much better to have just a handful of days like this that are absolutely just beautiful. I look forward to them. I like them. And it makes you appreciate them more if you don't have them that much. And that's like, that's something I think a lot of people who live in like better climates, where like the weather is always better, Southern California or something like that. I don't know if they necessarily appreciate the nice weather when they get it. 9 months out of the year, it's terrible. People talk about how miserable it is. And yeah, it is pretty bad. But then 3 months out of the year, sweet. It's awesome. All right, already 60 people in here. Jeez, I was just trying to shoot the shit for just a second. All right. Okay, so talking about a little bit about China and what's going on over there right now. Found this link down in the description. It's hard to follow a lot of the mainstream media and trying to understand what it is that's taking place out there because there's just so much propagandized information. But I think the bottom line story of what's being told here, right? Exports are falling and imports are increasing in China, right? Exports are falling, imports are increasing. And now when we think about like what is happening here, if we look back and we think about the Cantillon effect, right? Something that I go over constantly, right? Cantillon's essay on economic theory. And part of the Cantillon effect is understanding what is happening with your manufacturing base, because this is where a lot of times that people get very confused about the situation and they really want to blame politics, or they blame maybe some other social condition, or blame the Fed, or blame all kinds of stuff out there on the reasonings on why like the manufacturing base is leaving, okay? Or why it is that we are driving in or having so much imports coming in, failure on exports. People have a lot of questions on why this is taking place, and instead of coming up with good reasons, they end up blaming, right? And blame is the number one outcome for almost everybody when they think about this subject. But really, when you just think about it from what Cantillon was describing, right? When you take it back and you think about like when you are first industrialized, when you are first getting into a position in which that you know how to produce or create or serve or do something, right? You figured out a way that you know how to make money. Okay? And now this doesn't matter if it's a country or a business or an individual. It doesn't matter. It all goes down the same way. The moment that you figure out how to earn money, what you do is you produce and you save. And this goes for just about everybody out there. I mean, think about it. Like a high school graduate gets their first job. They never had a job before. They're earning a little income. What can they do with it? Well, now they could possibly make a car payment or get into an apartment, right? What they have done is they're raising their standard of living. And again, this will go for just about anybody out there, whether it's a country or a business or an individual. You start earning money, you become a producer saver, and you're going to want to enjoy that production and savings, and you're going to raise your standard of living. Now, everything is cool at this point as far as raising your standard of living, because everybody wants to enjoy their money. I mean, what was the point of working and saving if you don't actually use it for enjoyment of raising your standard of living? I mean, this is going to happen for just about everybody. But what ends up happening over time, if this continues, is that what you will find is that ever increasing amounts of people will want to drive a bigger car, a nicer car, live in a bigger house, wear nicer clothes, live in better areas, take fancier vacations. They will start doing things that increases the amount of luxuries that are in their life. Now, when they increase the amount of luxuries that are in their life, what they have done is they have increased the amount of consumption that is happening out there, right? You're not just satisfied with the regular car, you need a fancier car. You're increasing consumption. Everybody has a regular car. We want a nice car. This is the move into luxury. So going from not just consumption, but moving into luxuries is added consumption, and it's a lot of it. When you have more consumption, you have supply-demand imbalances. With supply and demand imbalances, prices increase. What ends up happening when prices increase is that the domestic manufacturers have a hard time competing against the foreign production that's happening out there. So then the foreign production starts to find its way into that economy, and it drives out the domestic manufacturing, and you find ever increasing amounts of imports and ever decreasing amounts of exports. This is exactly what the United States was facing when we used to be the manufacturing producers of the entire world. We produced the greatest stuff, and we sent that out there to the world, and the world sent us their money. We increased our standard of living, prices went up, luxuries started flowing in, and then we had the issues with the manufacturers leaving, and we want to blame that on politics. We want to blame it on bankers. We want to blame it on greedy corporates. We want to blame it on all this stuff. But yet Cantillon described it hundreds of years ago. So there's no point in reinventing the wheel. We know what's going on. What happened is that every economy goes through the same thing. They start increasing the amount of production that they are doing. They are going to enjoy it. Enjoying it literally means at some point the luxuries will come in, the manufacturing base won't compete, and you will find that the issues of having supply-demand imbalances will keep the separation between the rich and the poor, right? Because manufacturing base is really a good, strong, increasing manufacturing base is really what builds that middle class, right? But if you don't have that anymore, you're going to have two classes, the rich and the people who serve. And so this is really where the United States has this huge separation between the rich and the poor, and it will continue to grow so long as the new money pours in. And China is suffering the consequences of trying to figure out how it is that they are going to get the new money to come in, because their new money comes in from manufacturing. See, the United States used to get their new money in from manufacturing, and when that didn't work anymore, we severed ourselves from the gold standard and said, hey, we're going to get new money in from debt issuance. And so we're just going to sell U.S. treasuries until we can't sell U.S. treasuries anymore. That's how we get our new money in. But China can't really do that. Like, they could try and sell their debt, but it doesn't matter if nobody out there in the world trusts China enough to buy their debt. They have to sell stuff. They have to sell stuff in order to get new money to come in any kind of significant way. So this is where they're going to suffer the consequences of it, and they are going to act accordingly. Now, what is it that they really plan on doing? There's a lot to be speculated inside of that, because nobody can tell the future. They have lent out literally billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to nations all over the world to build up their infrastructure, doing the Belt and Road, right, initiative. They did this in US dollars. They lent it out in dollars, and those dollars are due back to them. So they can get new money in from the debt issuance that they have provided out there to the world, but the world doesn't pay them back. That doesn't really benefit them much. The only way they can get new money in is through manufacturing, or they can sell their debt, which doesn't work, or they can go to war. Or come up with something even more creative than that. But going by this, I think there's really only a few options that they really have. So keeping an eye on this particular subject, seeing how China is suffering the consequences of having a rising standard of living from the manufacturing that they have done, can no longer compete against the world out there. What is it that they are going to do about that? It can be very dangerous territory to tread water in, you know what I'm saying? All right. Hey, so we got Jack Stewart with the $5. Thank you so much. And I see we had a few people not only re-up on the membership, like Deja Vu. Thank you so much, Deja Vu. But we've had quite a few members who have joined the channel. Thank you so much for becoming a member of the channel. It's the easiest way to break down the information that you need in order to understand what is truly happening with the monetary policies out there. The credible threat theory is now running rampant through the economy, and you can see it. Like, those who understand the credible threat theory are reading these news articles and laughing at a lot of these economists out there who really have no clue about what it is that the Federal Reserve is attempting to do. But when we see the articles and we start seeing where mortgage refinance jumps 16% on the idea that there's going to be rate cuts coming into the future, because that is actually lowering the mortgage rates. Now, granted, 16% on increasing and refinancing, especially when you have such a dramatic drop in the amount of it, is nothing to be like, writing home about, saying, oh, look at this huge shift and change in the refinancing market. No, I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that nothing has changed with the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy. They have made no promises of rate cuts. They have not cut rates. They have not done anything different that they have done over the last couple of months outside of a little bit of balance sheet adjustments. They have changed nothing to the interest rates, but yet you're starting to see the rates fall. And they really were moving dramatically over the last couple of days, but now the markets are coming to their senses and starting to process some of the information that is being said out there and realizing that no, we are not suffering in the same position in which that everybody thought that there was going to be this doomsday stock market crash that's going to destroy the entire globe. People realized, they finally woke up and it was like, okay, it's not that bad yet, right? Now, could it be? Sure, why not? But is it there? No, not at this time. And people recognize that nothing has changed. Nothing in the market had been any different other than possibly the major unwinding of the carry trade position coming out of Japan. Now, granted, that is pretty major, and it does have a fairly big impact on the global economy. But again, this is probably going to end up finding its equilibrium over time as the interest rate adjustments that people are now positioning themselves with is going to find its position, right? It eventually finds an equilibrium. If there was a major event that had happened, a terrorist attack, some sort of I don't know, a triggering event of some sort, right? Then yeah, I could see hey, then all bets be off on what's going on right now. But ultimately, it's all market misunderstanding and perception of failure that just doesn't exist yet. And I don't know how else to explain it. It totally worked in the Fed's benefit. The Fed wants to juice the economy. All they have to do is put enough propagandized information out there that they are actually going to cut rates. You'll see the impact of rate cuts coming to the markets, coming to the economy. We witnessed it take place over just a course of a couple of days. Can you imagine if they really push that information, really push the propagandized information? We would see it. You guys want to go hang out by the river? Let's go do that. Let's go hang out by the river for a little bit. We'll go read some comments over there. That'll be fun. Besides, the neighbors over here are staring at me. They don't know what the hell's going on. They're like, why is this crazy dude talking to himself? All right. We'll go sit over here at the bench. Yes, check this out, guys. See, this is where I get to live every day. This is basically right behind where I work. Pretty cool, right? Gotta get you some water view, some river view there. Let me see if I put it there. Here, I'll just hold it a little bit. All right. Wow, that's a massive river. Yeah, the Columbia River. It's huge. 4.3 miles across over to Washington. I love my condo in Lincoln City. Lincoln City's all right. I like being on the beach. I can see why home prices have gone up a lot in that area. Yeah, ridiculous. Even still, the ZELLE estimate went up again this week on my house. So not a lot of room to build. and it's a hugely desirable area to be in. It's clean, it's friendly, um, it's beautiful like it is, historic. It's a 200-year-old town, city. I love it when you go down to the river more than when you imitate Trump going, there's no inflation. Still makes me laugh every time. Oh, I love that one. I mean, I, I love making fun of Trump for that particular one because it was just like the only other one that I really like to make fun of, but nobody remembers Kudlow. Wasn't it Kudlow? Yeah. It was Kudlow saying, we got it contained. Well, I'm not going to say that we got it contained, but yeah, we got it contained. Talking about COVID, it was like 2 days later, it was just breaking out all over the country. And I'm like, good one, man. Nice call, bro. Yeah. All right. Take Me to the River. Remember that song? Yeah. All right. Lucky you. Yep. Have you heard of Jimmy Dore show? He would have you on all the time if he knew who you were. I don't. I don't think I. Maybe I do. I don't know. Northwest Indiana is booming right now. Chicagoland is expanding. Right, all-nighter. I need to obtain that property that Dishes sent me. Looks like a good deal so far. All right. You say the Fed is going for a 2% inflation average over time. What is the time period? That is the biggest question because it doesn't really exist with the time period. They already said it. Like if you go and you read August 20th, 2020, Jerome Powell's speech talking about how they are going for a 2% average inflation rate over time, can be considered a flexible average inflation targeting, but that they do not have a mathematical formula for figuring out what the average inflation rate over time is. So there is no timeline. You can't ask the question, what is the timeline? There is no timeline. There isn't, right? Because there's no mathematical formula for figuring out what the average inflation rate over time is, which doesn't make a lot of sense. However, if you do think about it in a different fashion, if you think about it right now, how much average inflation we have experienced over the last year, okay? I don't know exactly what that is, but you can assume that it's probably going to be higher than 2%. If you incorporate 2 years, you're going to be higher than 2%. 3 years is going to be an average of higher than 2%. In fact, if you go all the way back into the previous decade, you would not find a time in which that if you incorporated all the inflation that we have experienced, plus the inflation, the lack of inflation that we were experiencing the previous decade, that you would have to go all the way back to somewhere in like 2008, 2009 to find an average inflation rate of 2%. So there is the formula for you. If you want to know what the Federal Reserve is looking at, they're trying to figure out how far back from this current moment, right? If you take back the, average inflation for a year, average inflation for 2 years, how far back would they need to go to hit the 2%? That's how they're figuring out the average inflation. They want to know how far back, their backward-looking average inflation rate. So during the times of the failure to achieve the 2% target, like after the great financial crisis, right, where they had a balance sheet expansion of $850 billion to $4.5 trillion and failed to produce the 2% inflation rate that they were targeting, right? So they were under 2% the entire time, or not the entire time, but for a good majority of the time. Now, this is a major problem for the Federal Reserve, right? So instead of going for a 2%, because like before the Fed would just be a 2% target. If they missed it, they would try to get it, right? So if they were over 2%, they would adjust policy to come down to 2%. If they were under, they would adjust policy to get to 2%. This is the classical form of understanding the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. This is how 99% of the people see it out there, is that if the Federal Reserve is above 2%, they will try to bring inflation down to 2. If they are under 2, they will try to bring it up to 2. This is wrong. This is wrong. That's not the way the Federal Reserve is looking at inflation. They do not target inflation like that anymore. There are going to be times, and they have said this, that appropriate monetary policy like now. I mean, Jerome Powell said it 4 years ago. Michelle Bowman reiterated it a couple of months ago. During the congressional hearing, if you listened carefully, you could actually hear Jerome Powell saying it, right? But it was very clever the way he worded it. But he even reiterated it during the congressional hearing that they are going for a 2% average inflation rate over time. So now everybody is misunderstanding the Fed because they still think of it as a 2% target, meaning if they are above it, they are going to bring it down to 2%. However, during that speech, during Michelle Bowman's speech, during the reiteration during Congress, they said appropriate monetary policy would seek to achieve inflation that is moderately above 2% for some time. But they didn't give any indication of what some time would be. So now we have to understand this is a 5-year long monetary policy. It gets reviewed at the end of the year. It was reviewed 4 years ago in 2020 when they made the change to monetary policy. They're going to review it again at the end of this year. When they do that, we will find out whether or not they are still going for average inflation targeting or if they go for a 2% target rate. They may change it, but as of today, it's seeking to achieve an inflation rate that is moderately above 2% for some time to make up for the fact that they were failing to achieve the 2% target. It's very important to understand this stuff. And the main reason why they have to do this is because the neutral interest rate had hit the lower bound, or had dropped near to zero. When the Fed funds rate had hit the lower bound of zero, their monetary policy had become ineffective. It was no longer going to work. So it's very important to understand that the interest rate adjustments are no longer like the effective tool that the Federal Reserve is doing. That is so mind-blowing to most people out there. They will not understand it because they are still stuck in the classical form of understanding the Fed, especially like the 2% target. So understanding what the Federal Reserve is really trying to do is they are trying to get an inflation expectation that is elevated. They need the elevated inflation expectations. And the reason why they need that is so they can raise the Fed funds rate and get the neutral interest rate to rise as well. If they can raise the neutral interest rate, when they go to lower rates, they can actually stimulate the economy because they can get it below the neutral rate. This is very important. They can move back to their classical form of conducting themselves with monetary policy. But at this point, it doesn't work. So they have to use their words. And you can see that working incredibly well. Just think about what's happened over the last few days here in the markets with mortgage rates, with 10-year treasuries, right? All this stuff started to drop off of the idea of what is coming into the future that has no promises, right? And so once you see it, like, I mean, I know I keep going over this information over and over again, but it's important, right? It's important to internalize it in this fashion, because once you recognize it, once you see it, you will recognize it within these articles, within all the comments coming from all these, other economists out there, the delusional speakings of the Congress talking about what it is that Jerome Powell needs to do with rates, like all this stuff will finally, you'll be able to look at that and say, this is obscured information that doesn't make any sense. The reality of the situation is that the Federal Reserve needs an elevated inflation expectation to raise the neutral interest rate. By raising the neutral interest rate, they will actually be able to get their firepower back, which is the adjustment of monetary policy through the Fed funds rates, right? But it takes time. It takes time of an elevated inflation expectation to raise that neutral interest rate. Just like anything else out there, the moment that the Fed cuts rates, it takes anywhere from 6 months to a year before that really impacts the economy. But look at what the markets believe and what they do the moment that information gets out there of the idea of a rate cut. Just look like the Fed didn't do anything, but yet all this interest rate adjustment started to happen. Okay? They know how to work this system. They work it good, and they cannot explain it to you the way that I'm explaining it to you, because if they did, then the whole thing would fall apart. They would no longer have their credible threats. They would no longer be able to do the forward guidance and signaling and job owning, because we would all recognize it for what it is. Now, here on this channel, we do, but outside of the 10, 20,000 people who might caught on a little bit to this idea, the millions and millions and millions of people out there still believe in the classical form of how the Federal Reserve is operating. It's not right, yeah. All right, what time is it? Whoops. You guys stay with me here. All right. God, I just got you balanced there. All right. Eventually, inflation scenario will come back as older generations transfer wealth. I feel like the Fed has been bailing out Great Depression 2.0 since the Great Financial Crisis. That's okay. Stopping probably won't more important. Probably more important. It's just not that important. It's virtually the same thing over time, all at once. As if stealing 2% of your wealth every year is okay. Taking the day off from the deck to fix my brakes, my truck was really screaming at me. Unemployment rate, Jesus, autocorrect is useless. You're obviously most in tune with building material markets more than any other. What are you seeing from the manufacturers of other products, windows, doors, siding, shingles, drywall, etc.? Price cuts? Yep. In fact, I was just given a summer deals. Come get the summer deals, right? All the siding, all the stuff, everything dropping like crazy. Now, granted, you do have to buy bulk, and they want to move products. So, in order to get the good deal, you do have to buy quite a bit of volume to make it happen. But the fact is that they have the volume to move, and they're looking to do it. That is a sign, right? They wouldn't be offering it up if there was a huge demand out there. So the demand must be falling. It's obvious. You can also see it within the lumber industry right now. Like, lumber at 500 per thousand is not a position in which that mills want to operate at. They operate at a much higher level right now, considering all the stuff that we have experienced over the last year. The added input cost, energy cost, investment cost, interest rate cost, all this stuff has gone up. It doesn't give these mills a position in which that 500 per thousand is going to be a benefit to them. Okay? So they don't produce at 500 per thousand. They produce as little as they can get away with and still stay open. And the curtailments are still running rampant through the markets, through the economy. Even just now, I was talking with one of the buyers of lumber out there, and he was like, man, there's all kinds of gaps, as far as like what it is that we were looking for in order to fill the inventory spots. Some things are really odd. Like, he said he just ordered plywood and was able to get an entire truck of plywood and get it delivered here in the next like 2 or 3 days or something, which is like unheard of previously. And even in the market, like the stuff that I'm reading as far as reports go, should say that wouldn't take place, but yet it just did. So like, there's major obscurities happening. I'm assuming that some areas are now facing like a flood of material, and I wouldn't necessarily call it a flood, but other areas are really dry, which would create the shortages that people are looking for. So we look and we're like, how come we don't see these shortages that everybody's talking about? Well, it's because we happen to have the material in our area. But just because we have it in our area doesn't mean that everybody else in the entire country has it in their area as well. So yeah, we were able to get it in a short time period, but other people might not be able to get access to it, for weeks, And so again, that's like, that is the discrepancy that you see. That is the issues that are happening within the lumber market. Like, some people might like even comment here on this channel, it's like, well, you ought to come down to my Home Depot and see all the blah blah blah. Okay, great, yeah, man. That's not an indication of the entire industry. Like, even my yard isn't an indication of the entire industry, just from the simple plywood order that we had done. But considering what it is that's being reported for the last few months, and what we are experiencing right now with incredibly low prices and the curtailment, it's only a matter of time. Right? It's only a matter of time. If the interest rates really did come down and the buyers started coming to the market and those builders started getting excited, I don't feel that there's enough lumber inside of the market to handle a major increase in building. Like, I don't see that happening, so I don't see any major concerns at this time. But if those rates were to start coming down significantly, if they did those emergency rate cuts like people are saying, and all that so comical. I'm not saying they are. If they did do something like that, well then yeah, you'd probably see like some pretty major impacts actually taking place to the lumber prices and moving up. in a dramatic fashion, but I don't think that's going to take place. I don't. I think it's going to be issues like we've seen over the last couple of days. I think that sort of thing is how the Fed is going to be behaving going into the future, is that if they need to juice the economy, or if they need to try and restrict the economy, it'll literally come from their words that they use. They will stand still. They're going to sit on their hands. They're not going to do anything. They won't adjust their rates, but they will put the perception out there, and that will guide the markets, and you can see it. You see it happening right now. All right, moving down here to the bottom. Let's cruise to the bottom. All right, high unemployment rate is recessionary, just that the unemployment rate is still at historic lows. That's right. That's very right. And I mean, typically, and again, like, the Federal Reserve lost control over inflation, and we have to understand what it is that they lost control over inflation was that they couldn't find it. They couldn't find inflation. Like, they got all the inflation in the world. They didn't lose control over it. It's coming down. Right? Now, a lot of people don't believe that it will continue to come down, and there may be very good reasons in which that it doesn't come down, especially if we have major shortages coming from places like China, who isn't going to be manufacturing if they're going to a recession. But, to understand that the Federal Reserve could not find the inflationary scenario that they were hoping for, even though they had historically low unemployment. Like, every president was bragging about it. Like, Obama bragged about it, Trump bragged about it, everybody was bragging about it up until the pandemic hit and everybody lost their job. They still, even after that, we had historically low unemployment, right? After everybody lost their job, and then all of a sudden there was this huge labor shortage, right? All that, and excluding the pandemic part of things, because that was the obscurity, but all previously leading up to that should have created an inflationary scenario that was running rampant through the economy, right? Historically low unemployment should have shot inflation through the roof, but it didn't do it. They couldn't even find inflation. And so now the Federal Reserve is like, oh crap, now what do? We lowered interest rates to zero. That's our main policy tool. Now we're out of that. And unemployment came down to historically low levels, 60-year lows, right? Best labor market in history, and still couldn't find inflation. They were like, what do we do? What are we going to do? We have run out of monetary policy. We are losing it here. Low neutral interest rate has destroyed our monetary policy in the way that we conduct ourselves. Okay? Well, pandemic kicked in. Oh, really? Pandemic. An unusual and exigent circumstance. No kidding. Well, now you got part of the charter, 13.3, allows you to set up special purpose vehicles to backstop every corner of the financial market, gives you the ability to have a government stimulus programs running rampant out there, and you're providing all the money for them to do that, right? Just buying up all them treasuries. God. And creating the inflationary scenario. You guys got it back. Incredible. Like, I mean, if you were to ask a Federal Reserve official back in 2018, how the hell are you going to save your monetary policy if you're going to find inflation, if you couldn't find inflation even after a quantitative easing of 1, 2, 3, and 4 and historically low or interest rates, you still couldn't find inflation? What are you going to do to create inflation? There's nothing you can do. Oh, pandemic, right. Shortages, got it. Stimulus packages. Dang, man, I did not see that one coming. You're right, guys. Yeah. Thank you, Memento Mori, for the $4.99. Is the Fed trying to raise the neutral interest rate? Yes, they are. Only to gain ammunition to have influence over the economy? Is this why the Fed was created? Well, okay, that's two questions here. Let's answer one of those at a time. All right, I got 15 minutes here, so let's answer one of those at a time. The Federal Reserve is trying to raise the neutral interest rate, yes. Okay. Now, they're trying to raise the neutral interest rate because that is what gives them their ammo, is the adjustment of rates. So if you lower rates, say from 5 to 3%, but the neutral interest rate is, say, 0.5% or 1%, you're still restricted, right? You can't stimulate the economy even if you lowered interest rates, even 2% from right now, if you took, the Fed funds rate from 5.5 down to 3.5%, you would still be restricting. You'd still be in a restrictive economy because you're still above the neutral interest rate. So this is the problem that the Federal Reserve is facing. Just understand that part of it, right? That is an issue for them. They would love to be able to adjust rates and not say anything, just to adjust the Fed funds rate, and that be the monetary policy tool. But they can't conduct it like that. That's why they come out with all these words and all these, news articles and all this stuff that they constantly push out there, is because that's the monetary policy. The adjustment of rates doesn't work, right? Because even if you were to lower rates right now, you still wouldn't stimulate the economy. The belief would, right? The markets would act as if that's stimulating the economy, but the reality to the situation, give it time, over time, it wouldn't stimulate the economy in the fashion that the Federal Reserve would typically anticipate. Because, again, they are still above the neutral interest rate, which means that they are restrictive. Okay, so give it time. If the elevated inflation rate, or the elevated inflation expectation and the higher Fed funds rate stays within the economy for a significant amount of time, the longer that goes on, the higher the neutral interest rate will go. Okay, so this is what the Federal Reserve is attempting to do, is to get that neutral interest rate to rise. Now, whether they can get it to be done in a significant way before the economy starts going into a major downturn or something else, that very well, that may not happen. Like, they may not be able to get the neutral interest rate there before the next downturn. But this is their attempt. So long as they have low inflation with stable prices, make sure I say that right, and full employment, which, right now we still have historically low unemployment, this is the dual mandate. That's what they're attempting to achieve. Okay? So that's what the Federal Reserve is attempting to do right now. They were designed for something different. Now, you have to understand, we were on a gold standard back in the day, which meant that if you kind of understand the Cantillon effect, there was business cycles. So as people were really active inside of doing business transactions, a lot of economic activity happening, well, then you would have a concentration of wealth because you only had so much currency out there. It was limited to the amount of gold, right? So as all these people are doing work, right, they're creating businesses, they're creating stuff, they're doing services, they're making money, right? What do? You save this money. So as you're starting to save the money, what you're doing is you are denying everybody else out there who is not saving money the ability to do transactions, because the currency simply isn't there, because all the people who have hoarded the money. This is the business cycle. So as the business cycle heats up, the concentration of money takes place, then all of a sudden you'll have a downturn, right? The business cycle comes to an end. You'll have a slowdown, the redistribution of the wealth, because everybody has to give up their money again, essentially. And then you'll have the business cycle start back over again. Well, now this was really hard on a lot of people. Like, they didn't like this. They didn't like the idea that they had made all this money and then all of a sudden they had to give it all back up again, right? So it was quite devastating to a lot of people who didn't prepare themselves for the downturn, right? They were loving it during the run-ups, but then thought it was going to go on forever. So when the business cycle came to an end, they were quite devastated by it, and all of a sudden you'd have all these bread lines and soup kitchens and all the other issues that, were typical of the gold standard and, the Depressionary era kind of stuff. So the Federal Reserve can be an elastic money supply. So what happens is that when the business cycle ramps up and all this activity starts to happen, the Federal Reserve would inject money into the system, right? Here's a bunch of money to continue on doing your transactions. And then when business slowed down, they would pull the money back out, right? And so this was going to be the elastic money supply to smooth out the business cycles. This was the idea that they sold to the people. And it kind of worked for the most part. I mean, you think about it, like the government and the Federal Reserve, they can step in during downturns and do stimulus packages and, try to get like government spending to get unemployment, to fall and stuff like that. So they do get to participate inside of the economy in a way that can be a benefit, I guess, like if you look at it as a benefit to the economy or to the people. But ultimately what it had done is it created debt cycles. So now we got this huge debt cycle that begins to take place where, much like what we are experiencing today. And so with these debt cycles, it becomes quite devastating to a lot of people as, again, businesses slow down or they're not able to make their payments on or not able to refinance, and you have those issues that come from it. However, the major problem that I see from having debt cycles as opposed to business cycles is that if you have ever increasing amounts of new money that pours into the system, you'll have ever increasing amounts of separation between the rich and the poor, and you'll never find the equilibrium again, right? So long as that new money comes in. Now, it won't last forever. At some point, the new money will turn off and everybody will fall into poverty and misery. But how long will that take and when will that happen? Who knows, right? All right, is it time? It's time, guys. I got to go. All right, let's read all-nighters. I do believe politics plays a mechanical role in economics, only a psychological role. Politicians do not set interest rates or have anywhere near the mechanical power that banksters have, in my opinion. I totally agree with that, all-nighter. Absolutely. All right. And see, here's the thing, like so many people, and this is my only argument about the whole politics thing, is because we hear about it a lot, especially you're going to hear a lot about it over the next, few months here. But this is the thing. I used to be heavily involved in the political mindset and thoughts and arguments and studies and all that other stuff. I did a lot of that, right? And at the same time, I was trying to figure out a lot of what was going on in the economy. I was never so confused about the economy as much as I was when I was studying politics. The moment that I got politics out of it and started studying the financial system independently of government, when I started studying economic theories independent of political influence, when I started looking at a lot of the things that are taking place out there, I realized that politics interferes and clouds a lot of the perspectives and understandings of what is happening out there. Because we have internalized so much political information and ideas and thoughts and control over our lives, that we then now have this view of it applied to everything that we look at, including economics, including our business, including everything that we have going on in our life. We do not have to give it that meaning. You don't. And I understand that a lot of people who do don't see it any other way. And I get it. Like, I totally get why. But you can see it from a different view. You can take it in a different meaning, and you can look at it for what it really is, and not one through a political mindset. Now, granted, that's going to be very difficult for people who are very hardcore involved in study, and they cannot see it. In fact, they will find it ignorant or stupid or however you want to say, dumb, right? That if you don't involve politics, you're somehow like, a moron, right? And now that I find incredibly dangerous, because there is information that exists about this that is so much more profound and deep rooted through the economic forces that doesn't include the political mindset. And yet these people are saying that if you don't take on this evil intent, that you will not see it, and therefore everything you say is wrong, right? That is dangerous. Don't fall for that, right? Look at this stuff for your own. Like, it's not bad to look at politics, right? That's not a bad thing. Like, I mean, I understand that a lot of people have it very important in their life, right? They make it very important in their life. And I'm not saying that it's not important. What I am saying is that economics involvement has a lot more to do than that of a political view. It is so much more deeper than that, right? Once you get it, once you understand it, once you see it, then you can apply some of that politicalness to it, right? But you will understand it for the economic forces it is. How many people would take the article that I leave down in the description from this and blame it in politics? Raise your hand. How many people would do that? I'm sure a lot of people are doing that right now, right? But yet, Cantillon described this exact scenario hundreds of years ago, before there was any of the politicians that we have in existence today. But yet he was able to describe it. Why? Because it's an economic force that's underlying, right? Yeah, political involvement is very much there. It is very, it's obvious, right? They talk about it. They're there. They're speaking. They're doing things. They're making laws and changing stuff, right? But the fact is that this was described hundreds of years ago. So why are we trying to reinvent the wheel with politics? It's an economic force that then has politics involvement on it, right? They are reacting. They are not causing. And that is so important to understand. Nobody wants to look at it that way. They want to think of them as causing. They're not. They're reacting. They're reacting to the economy, right? We have to rise. We have to be powerful. We have to be producers, savers, and all that stuff first before anybody can come in and start pushing their power, right? We have to rise as a person first. We have to rise as the people, or else they wouldn't have anything to control. All right. Thank you guys, Uneducated Economist. I hope you enjoy the view. It's a nice sunny day here in Astoria. Oh, we got another super chat. Well, let me go read the super chat real quick. And another member to the channel. Thank you so much for joining the channel. But let's go read the super chat real quick. Tony Carr 55, thank you so much for the $9.99, man. Thank you. He says, thank you, UE. You're awesome, man. All right, Lynette is an awesome woman. Yeah, I'm supposed to talk with Lynette. I got to send an email out. Thanks for the reminder. Okay, you guys are awesome. Thank you for being here, Uneducated Economist. Here, I'll give you one more shot of the river before I end the stream. Oops. Hey, and another super chat. Thank you, Redscan. Thank you so much for the $5, man. All right, one more quick shot. Here, and I'll walk down onto the rocks and give you guys a shot of the bridge. If I don't fall. All right. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.